The notification on my phone buzzed. Quarterly review, 3 p.m., 2 hours away. I had planned the rest of my day around it. Time to finish lunch, polish my slides, maybe even breathe for a moment. But then I heard the voice I'd come to dread. "You've got 2 minutes." I looked up. My boss, Richard, leaned against my cubicle wall, arms folded, that smug little grin plastered on his face. "For what?" I asked, fork hovering over my salad. "The pitch," he said, as if I'd been asleep all day. "Our $10 million account, conference room B, they're waiting." My fork clattered into the plastic container. "That's tomorrow. 3 o'clock, Plans change." He checked his Rolex, tapping the glass. "Now you've got 90 seconds. Don't keep them waiting." My stomach dropped. The pitch, the one I'd spent 6 weeks building, the one I had rehearsed until the words flowed like second nature. The slides were still on my desktop. The printouts? At the shop? The prototype? Unassembled. He knew that. Of course he did. And still he smirked. "Come on, Michelle." Adaptability is part of the job I stood, pulse racing, palms damp. My laptop was mid-update, useless. My files were locked behind company firewalls on mobile. I had nothing but my phone, my memory, and my wits. As I walked toward the elevator, the realization hit like ice water down my spine. This wasn't poor planning. It was sabotage. Richard wanted me to fail. The doors slid shut, sealing me in with my pounding heart. I jabbed at my phone, trying to access cloud storage, blocked. I considered calling IT. Pointless. 30 seconds to the ground floor. 30 seconds to decide how to salvage not just a presentation, but my career. When the elevator opened, the sight nearly stopped me. Through the glass walls of the conference room sat 6 executives in tailored suits, phones in hand, impatience on their faces, and at the head of the table, Mr. Alan Pierce himself, CEO, a man whose signature could shift markets. This was bigger than I thought, and Richard knew it. He intercepted me just outside the door, lowering his voice to a mock whisper. "Where's the deck, Michelle?" "On my desktop," I said evenly, "for tomorrow's meeting." "Well, that's unfortunate." He straightened his tie, then smiled for the first time all day, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Don't embarrass us." Then he pushed the door open and announced with false cheer, "Gentlemen, may I introduce Michelle, our lead on this project. She'll be walking you through everything." 6 pairs of eyes turned toward me. Richard slid into a chair near the door, close enough to jump in if things went miraculously well, far enough to wash his hands if it crashed. "Ms. Johnson," Alan Pierce said, his voice cool, controlled. "We were told you were ready." "We flew people in for this." My throat tightened. My hands trembled against my phone. No slides, no notes, nothing but me. "Thank you for making time today," I began, voice steadier than I felt. "Before I begin, may I ask something?" The executives exchanged glances. "Go ahead," Alan said. "What's the primary challenge you're hoping our solution will address?" His CFO frowned. "We've covered that in preliminary talks." "Of course," I said quickly. "But sometimes restating the problem reveals new angles. And I'd like to make sure I address what matters most," silence stretched. Then, almost despite himself, Alan leaned forward. "All right. Let's see what you've got." I had nothing prepared. Nothing but instinct. But if Richard wanted to watch me drown, I'd at least make him nervous before I sank. The room was silent, all eyes fixed on me, waiting for a polished pitch I didn't have. My phone lay useless in my hand, locked out of the files I'd prepared. Richard sat at the edge of the room, expression carefully neutral, but I caught the flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. He thought he'd won already. I forced myself to breathe, steady and slow. If I showed panic, they'd see weakness. And if I faltered, Richard would swoop in, apologize for my incompetence, and take over. I had 2 choices: drown in the failure he engineered, or swim in uncharted waters. All of the firms you've met with, I said carefully, have shown you variations of the same thing. Dashboards, reports, data neatly packaged in charts. Correct? Alan Pierce raised an eyebrow, his CFO leaning back in his chair. That's not far off. I nodded, pretending I knew more than I did. The truth was, I had guessed. Industry trend. Every competitor pushed the same tired tools. And that's fine, for companies that want to describe the past. But your challenge isn't understanding yesterday. It's predicting tomorrow. That made Alan pause. He leaned forward, fingers steepled. Go on. I gripped the pen and notepad sitting on the table, grateful someone had left them behind. You're not struggling with visualization. You have analysts who can read graphs. You're struggling with unpredictability, emerging markets, shifts in consumer behavior that don't follow historical models. Your competitors can't see it because they're too busy dressing up old data. The COO exchanged a look with the CFO. I caught the flicker of interest. My pulse steadied. I had something. Alan studied me. So what are you proposing? I drew a quick sketch on the pad, crude boxes and arrows. A predictive model that uses cultural context, not just numbers, to forecast behavior. Imagine knowing not just what your customers bought, but why. What values, traditions, or even local events drive their decisions. That's where the future lies. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Alan's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. Interesting, he said. Behind me, Richard shifted in his chair. I didn't need to look to know he was panicking. This wasn't the disaster he had scripted. One of the executives asked, "How would you build such a model?" I swallowed. Step 1 is identifying blind spots in your current data. May I ask, how many firms proposed custom models tailored to each market? The CFO shook his head. None. Every pitch so far has been off-the-shelf solutions. Exactly. I circled the word context on the pad. That's the gap. They're treating your markets like clones when they aren't. A model that incorporates cultural context doesn't just predict what will sell. It tells you where to invest, when to pivot, and how to stay ahead while others lag behind. The energy in the room shifted. People sat up straighter. Phones were put down. I had their attention. Alan raised a hand, silencing the murmurs. Michelle, was it? Yes. You're telling me your company can deliver this? I hesitated. This was the trap. If I overpromised, Richard would seize it as proof of recklessness. If I undersold, the opportunity would vanish. I'm telling you, I've spent weeks building the foundation of it, I said finally. The details are still in development, but the vision is clear. And the results could redefine how you operate silence again. The longest seconds of my life. Then Alan smiled. Not broadly, but with the weight of someone recognizing something genuine. I've sat through 6 pitches this month. All of them polished. None of them useful. Yours is the first that makes me think differently. He stood, pushing his chair back. The room froze. Richard was already half rising, prepared to apologize, maybe to smooth over my mistake. But Alan spoke first. We need to continue this conversation, he said, looking directly at me. But not in this format. Michelle, I'd like to meet privately. Bring me your full model when it's ready. He handed me his card. Call my office to schedule. I felt the air rush out of me. My hand shook as I took the card, aware of Richard's face tightening, his carefully laid trap collapsing in front of him. Thank you, Mr. Pierce. I managed. The executives began to rise, gathering their belongings. Alan offered a firm nod before leaving, his team trailing behind. The glass doors closed, leaving the room eerily quiet. Richard's mask slipped. His eyes burned with fury. What the hell did you just do? He hissed. My job, I said, clutching Alan's card like a lifeline. You've cost us everything. 10 million gone, have I? I slipped the card into my pocket. Or have you? his jaw clenched, muscles twitching. "This isn't over, Michelle." He was right. It wasn't, because what happened next would unravel everything he thought he controlled. The elevator ride back to our floor felt longer than usual. Richard stood stiff beside me, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the doors. Neither of us spoke, but the tension was suffocating. He had set a trap for me, and instead of falling, I'd climbed out and shaken hands with the one man Richard couldn't afford to lose. When the doors opened, he snapped into motion. My office. Now, people glanced up as he marched me across the open floor. Heads lowered quickly, but I saw it. The flicker of sympathy in a few eyes, curiosity in others. Nobody dared say a word. Richard closed his door with deliberate calm. "Explain yourself," he said, voice low and dangerous. "I adapted to the situation you created," I replied. My tone was steady, but inside my chest hammered. His laugh was sharp, hollow. "Adapted? You went completely off script." "There was no script. You made sure of that." He leaned against his desk, arms folded. "You've been building your own relationship with Pierce instead of representing the company. That ends today." "Alan Pierce asked for me," I said. "Not for you. Not for a team." Richard's eyes narrowed. "If you think I'm letting you steal this client..." "I've stolen nothing." I've worked. His lips curled. "We'll see about that." He opened his laptop and began typing. My phone buzzed almost immediately. An email from Richard addressed to the entire department. "Effective immediately, all client communications must be approved by management. Individual team members are not authorized to make promises or suggestions without prior review. Additionally, all new business development will now require a team-based approach, rather than individual leadership. Richard Palmer, Senior Director." The message was clear. He was clipping my wings in plain sight. I stared at the screen until another ping broke my focus. A message from Zoe, my friend in accounting. "Lunch tomorrow. Need to talk. Important." I typed back, "Noon, the place with the good soup." She replied instantly, "Perfect." By the time I shut my computer down for the night, exhaustion weighed heavy. But fear weighed more. Richard wasn't finished. He'd tasted the threat of losing control, and men like him didn't forgive that. Zoe was already waiting at our usual cafe the next day, nursing a cup of tea. The moment I sat down, she leaned in. "They're watching your emails." My stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" "Richard requested IT access yesterday. Said it was for continuity." She lowered her voice. "Michelle, he's combing through everything." "Can he even do that?" "Technically, yes, if he claims cause." But that's not the worst part. "What is?" "Finance was asked to prepare a severance package. For you, I froze, spoon halfway to my mouth." "What?" "The request came in this morning." "He's building a case." I set the spoon down carefully, though my hand shook. "I haven't done anything wrong." "It doesn't matter." Richard's connected. His brother-in-law plays golf with the CEO. If he paints you as insubordinate or, worse, disloyal, you'll be gone before you can defend yourself. I swallowed hard. "So I'm just supposed to sit here and wait for the axe to fall?" Zoe shook her head and slid something across the table. A small flash drive. "Your performance reviews, client testimonials, revenue reports showing exactly what you've brought in for this company. You're entitled to them, but he'll bury them if things turn ugly. Keep them safe." I picked it up slowly. "Why are you helping me?" Her eyes softened. "Because you once helped me when no one else would." The memory cut deep. 2 years ago, when Zoe reported harassment by our former sales director, management brushed her off. I'd gone to HR with supporting evidence from others. It nearly cost me my promotion, but it saved her job. "I haven't forgotten," she said. "Thank you," I whispered. "Don't thank me yet. Just be smarter than he expects." Back at the office, a calendar invite popped up. Performance review. Monday, 8 a.m. No agenda. No details. Through the glass walls, I spotted Richard in a closed-door meeting with Trent from legal. Their faces were grave. When Trent noticed me looking, he got up and closed the blinds. A chill ran down my spine. They weren't waiting for Monday. They were accelerating the timeline. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at Zoe's flash drive. My choices were clear. Stay quiet and let Richard end me, or fight back. But how? I opened my laptop and created a personal email account. Then I typed carefully, "Miss Chen, due to a potential conflict of interest, I need to discuss something privately with Mr. Pierce. Could you forward her my personal contact information?" I hesitated, then hit send. An hour later, my phone rang. Unknown number. "This is Michelle," I answered. "Miss Johnson," came the voice. Calm, firm, Alan Pierce. My heart pounded. "Mr. Pierce, thank you for calling. My assistant shared your message." What's this about a conflict of interest? I took a breath. Because of internal complications, I may not be able to communicate with you through company channels. I thought you deserved to know why. And why is that? Because my boss deliberately sabotaged yesterday's meeting. He blocked access to my materials. He's now restricting communication with you. And I believe he's building a case to fire me. Silence stretched. Then Alan asked, "And the framework you outlined, predictive modeling, cultural context, that was your work?" "Yes, 6 weeks of research. My approach." A pause. "Miss Johnson, are you free tomorrow morning? 7 a.m., Riverside Cafe. Come alone, bring nothing from your company." "Yes," I said, my voice trembling. "Good. We'll talk then." The line clicked dead. I stared at the phone. My career, my future, everything, balanced on the conversation waiting for me at dawn. The Riverside Cafe was nearly empty when I walked in at 6:55 the next morning. Rain streaked down the windows, the kind of soft drizzle that makes the world feel hushed. My stomach churned with nerves, but I forced myself to move steadily, heels clicking against the tiled floor. Alan Pierce sat in the corner, no entourage, no assistant. Just him, crisp suit, steaming coffee, posture straight as though he'd been waiting for me all night. "Michelle," he said, rising slightly as I slid into the booth. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for meeting me," I replied, trying not to sound as anxious as I felt. He nodded once, then studied me for a long moment before speaking. "Tell me why you think your boss wanted you to fail." I took a deep breath. 3 weeks ago, I challenged his strategy in front of senior leadership. He pushes a one-size-fits-all sales approach. We'd lost 2 major clients. I presented data showing why we needed tailored solutions. He didn't appreciate it. Alan's eyes narrowed slightly. From someone who reminds him of his past mistakes. I frowned. "What do you mean?" "Before your division, Richard Palmer ran our Midwest account. His rigid methods cost us months of positioning. We terminated the contract early. He nearly sank us in that region. I froze." "You worked with him before?" "Unfortunately." The man doesn't adapt. He covers failure with confidence until the damage is irreparable. Alan leaned closer. "And then he blames others." Pieces clicked together. Richard hadn't just seen me as a threat. He'd seen a reminder of his own humiliation. And when he saw my name tied to the Pierce pitch, the fear of history repeating itself had driven him to sabotage. Alan reached into his briefcase and placed a folder on the table. Inside was a document with the Diamante Group's logo. My pulse quickened. "What is this?" I asked. "Your future, if you want it. Director of Strategic Solutions, salary nearly double what you make now." I stared at the contract, heart racing. "You want to hire me?" "Based on one improvised conversation?" "Not improvised," Alan corrected. "Insightful. Anyone can polish slides. Few can identify the problem beneath the surface. You did that in minutes. That's not luck. That's vision." I closed the folder slowly. I can't just walk away. I've built relationships with clients. Projects mid-development. Michelle, Alan interrupted gently. Your loyalty is admirable but misplaced. You said yourself he's cutting you out. They're preparing a case against you. Why stay for a company already pushing you to the exit? I hesitated. He was right. But walking away with no transition, leaving my work unfinished, felt wrong. I need a few days, I said finally. You have until Monday, 9 a.m. Alan slid a card across the table. Call me with your decision. He stood, leaving his untouched coffee behind. And Michelle, be careful. Richard won't let this go easily. By Sunday afternoon, the decision was clear. My lists of pros and cons all pointed to the same conclusion. Diamante. Opportunity. Respect. A chance to build something without being undermined at every turn. Monday morning, I dressed professionally, but not for the performance review Richard had scheduled. My bag was already packed with personal belongings. At 7:55, I stepped into Richard's office. He was waiting with Trent from legal. Sit, Richard ordered. I remained standing. What's this about? He opened a folder, sliding a paper across the desk. Evidence of inappropriate communication. You emailed Pierce's assistant from a personal account. That's circumvention of company systems. Grounds for termination. I kept my face calm even as my stomach lurched. One message. To explain why I couldn't reply through company channels. That's enough, Trent said. Given the severity, we're prepared to terminate effective immediately. 2 weeks severance in exchange for signing this non-compete agreement. 2 weeks. After 5 years of loyalty. My jaw tightened. I pushed the papers back toward them. No. Richard smirked. Then we'll fire you for cause. You'll never work in this industry again. Actually, I said quietly, my contract's non-compete only applies if I'm terminated for cause or accept severance. I'm resigning. Effective immediately. For the first time, Richard's mask cracked. You can't just walk out. I already have. You've been stripping me from projects for weeks. Consider that my transition. His face flushed red. You'll regret this, Michelle. I'll make sure of it, I turned at the door. We'll see. As I walked through the office, eyes followed me. Some pitied, some admired. Only Zoe met my gaze and gave the faintest nod. She knew. Outside, I dialed the number Alan had given me. I've made my decision, I said when he answered. And? I accept your offer. With one condition, I need 2 weeks before I start. Why? There are loose ends I need to tie up. Alan paused. Very well. 2 weeks. And Michelle? Yes? I'm glad you're on our side. I hung up, my heart pounding with both fear and relief. 2 weeks. That was all I had. 2 weeks to prepare for what came next. Because Richard Palmer wasn't finished. And neither was I. The next 2 weeks were the longest of my career, yet every day felt sharpened by purpose. While Richard scrambled to rebuild his narrative, I worked quietly behind the scenes. I met with former clients who had left during his tenure, asking careful, open-ended questions about their experiences. I reconnected with colleagues pushed out over the years, listening as they described the same pattern I knew too well. Richard taking credit for wins, shifting blame for losses, silencing anyone who dared challenge him. I didn't fabricate anything. I didn't need to. I simply connected the dots. Zoe helped more than she should have, slipping me financial reports, performance data, and internal satisfaction surveys Richard had buried. Patterns emerged. Declines under his leadership, spikes when he was sidelined, client losses directly tied to his streamlined strategies. Meanwhile, I ignored every one of his attempts to bait me. Twice, emails arrived demanding transition notes. Once, he even called late at night, leaving a voicemail dripping with false authority. You're required to comply, Michelle. Don't test me. I deleted it. He'd already tested me enough. The Friday before my official start at Diamante, Zoe texted me. Board meeting tomorrow. He's claiming credit for salvaging Pierce. Says he rescued the account after you abandoned it. I smiled at the screen. Perfect timing. The next morning, I walked into Diamante headquarters, not as an outsider, but as their new director of strategic solutions. Alan greeted me personally and led me into a conference room. Inside sat 6 people I recognized, board members from my former company. "Miss Johnson," the chairman said, "your timing is impeccable. We were just discussing Mr. Palmer's presentation." For the next 2 hours, I listened as Alan laid out what we had compiled. Richard's history across 3 companies, client after client leaving under his watch, staff turnover, retaliation against dissenters, financial losses disguised as restructuring. It wasn't vindictive. It was factual. At the end, Alan delivered the final blow. Mr. Palmer claims to have saved this account. Meanwhile, we are finalizing a multi-year partnership with the person he pushed out. The board members sat in stunned silence. Then the chairman spoke, voice grim. "We appreciate this information. Appropriate action will be taken immediately." I said nothing. I didn't need to. My work was already done. 3 days later, an internal memo announced Richard's resignation to pursue other opportunities. Rumors swirled about an investigation into management practices. Former employees were being contacted for interviews. Zoe texted me. Board called emergency session. He was escorted out. I typed back only one word. Finally. 6 months passed in a blur. At Diamante, I thrived. The predictive cultural model I'd outlined in desperation during that ambush meeting became our flagship product. My team grew. My ideas weren't dismissed. They were celebrated. But life has a way of circling back. At the industry conference in Atlanta, as I reviewed my slides backstage, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. Richard. Cheaper suit. Hollow eyes. A man who looked like he'd aged 10 years and 6 months. "Michelle," he said quietly. "Congratulations on your success." I kept my expression cool. "What do you want, Richard?" He shifted, clearing his throat. "I've been consulting independently. It's been difficult. I wondered if we might clear the air, perhaps discuss collaboration." There it was. Not remorse, not apology. Just another angle, another ladder to climb. "There's nothing to discuss," I said. His mask slipped, bitterness flashing in his eyes. "You planned this. You used Pierce to take me down." "No," I said evenly. "You took yourself down. I just stopped covering for you." "The truth is you got lucky," he spat. "If Pierce hadn't taken a shine to you—" "It wasn't luck," I interrupted. "It was preparation meeting opportunity. Something you never understood." A staffer poked her head in. "Miss Johnson, you're on in 5 minutes." Richard stepped in front of me, blocking my path. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is." I walked past him without looking back. The stage lights were blinding, but the applause was real. As I presented our platform, one I'd built with my team, one rooted in everything Richard had dismissed, I caught a glimpse of him slipping out the back. He couldn't bear to watch. And that was my revenge. Not a dramatic outburst, not a public takedown, but something quieter, sharper, and far more lasting. I had stripped away the facade he'd built and let the truth show itself. I didn't destroy Richard Palmer. He did that all on his own. I simply refused to let him destroy me. Clear your desk. We don't need you and your useless checklist. The new CFO smirked, loud enough for half the office to hear. The words cracked through the room like a whip. A couple of analysts froze mid-keystroke. Someone coughed just to break the silence. I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I just smiled. He thought he'd landed his first public kill. The man's name was Victor Hale, freshly imported from a bigger firm, shiny MBA, Hair slicked back with the confidence of someone who believed arrogance was a leadership style. He strutted in like the company was his personal playground, and from the moment he arrived, he made it clear. People like me, quiet, methodical, the ones who checked every line in the contract, were obstacles, not assets. "Procurement is dead weight," he barked, pacing in front of my desk as if it were a courtroom. "We don't need binders, protocols, or these ridiculous checklists." He held up one of my printed compliance sheets like it was a used napkin. "We need speed." People watched, eyes darting between me and him, waiting for me to cry, to plead, to make a scene. I did none of those things. Instead, I unplugged my USB from the back of my monitor, slid it into my purse as calmly as a waitress pocketing a tip, and packed my things. One framed certificate, a photo of my niece, a succulent I'd kept alive for 7 years. That was it. 14 years in the company reduced to a small box of items and a quiet smile. No tears, no scene. Just me handing my badge to HR and walking out the front door at 4:57 p.m. 3 minutes before the end of the workday. Because I refused to give them even an extra hour of unpaid labor. I had been with Bayrock Systems for 14 years. I wasn't loud, I wasn't flashy. But I was the spine of vendor risk. If a vendor slipped a dangerous clause into a contract, I caught it. If a compliance checkpoint was about to be missed, I flagged it before legal even blinked. I was the escalation officer for our biggest infrastructure vendor, the one handling 70% of our payment operations. That wasn't symbolic. That was lifeblood. But Victor never looked, never asked, never read the contracts he signed. He was too busy mocking my binders, my systems, my old-fashioned checklists. What he didn't know was this. Last year, when our vendor updated their protocols, I quietly renegotiated our service authorization addendum. That made me the only one who could greenlight emergency access. Not IT, not legal, not even the CEO. Just me. And thanks to Victor's little tantrum, that authority had just walked out the door in a pair of worn flats and a cardigan that said, "Retired but dangerous." When I reached the sidewalk, I didn't cry. I didn't call my sister. I didn't even feel angry. What I felt was clarity, because Victor hadn't fired deadweight. He'd fired the wiring. And when you rip out the wiring, the lights always go out. By the time I got home, I had already drafted an email to a contact at our vendor. Just a short note, professional, attached with the necessary documentation. Nothing dramatic. I didn't have to scream. I didn't have to take revenge. All I had to do was let the system they signed collapse under the weight of their own arrogance. The thing about corporate executions? They're never clean. You think you're cutting a person, but you forget. Their work seeps into the wiring. I was the wiring. And Victor had no idea that in just a few days his smirk would curdle into panic. For now, though, I sat at my kitchen table, sipping lukewarm coffee, watching the evening sun hit the glass. 14 years of invisible labor dismissed in a single sentence. But invisibility has its advantages. They had erased my name from the payroll. But in the paperwork that mattered, the contracts, the escalation chains, the vendor protocols, my name was carved in bold letters. Amanda Torres, sole authorized escalation officer. Victor thought he had removed a bottleneck. What he really did was toss the only key to the entire system into the trash. And in less than a week, when payments froze across Bayrock, the board would learn the truth the hard way. Because this wasn't just a job. It was a system. And I was the system. By Monday morning, Victor strutted into the leadership meeting like he'd just conquered Rome. He had his PowerPoint open before people even sat down. Slide 1. New era of efficiency. All caps Arial, no data source, just a fat red arrow pointing upward. I wasn't there, of course, but I didn't need to be. A friend in IT, Sam, sent me a screenshot with the message, "He really thinks you were the problem." On slide 2, Victor had drawn a bar graph comparing process times before Amanda versus after Amanda. No footnotes, no citations, just numbers he'd pulled from the ether, proof that firing me had magically accelerated the company. "Procurement bottlenecks are gone," he declared, grinning like a raccoon who had just found a buffet. "We're fast-tracking agility." Nobody clapped, but nobody dared to contradict him either. When someone fires a 14-year veteran in public, people learn quickly to stay quiet. Fear spreads faster than facts. By Tuesday, cracks had already appeared. Sam messaged me again. First big payment batch failed. Jenna's panicking Jenna was new, promoted from payroll assistant to AP lead just 3 weeks earlier. She wasn't trained for vendor compliance. She was smart, hardworking, but green. She'd flagged the issue right away. A red box had popped up in the system. Authorization missing. Escalation officer override required. Jenna asked Victor if she should route it through risk review. He waved her off. "We don't need red tape. Just process it," except she couldn't. The system wouldn't let her. By Wednesday, the whispers started. Travel reimbursements bounced back. Software renewals froze. A regional sales manager sent 6 unanswered emails to finance about a hotel payment blocking a client retreat. One particularly sharp vendor rep threatened to withhold cybersecurity services if payment didn't arrive by close of business. The building began to buzz, not with productivity, but with unease. Slack channels filled with vague messages. "Is procurement still handling vendor checks?" Silence followed. Then someone from marketing dropped a dumpster fire GIF. Meanwhile, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open. Not working on my resume? No, not yet. Instead, I was watching vendor alerts roll in. Every failed payment, every flagged escalation landed in my personal archive. Why? Because I had mirrored every authorization chain for over a decade. People thought my checklists were old-fashioned. They weren't. They were precise, alphabetized, time-stamped. I had built the digital backbone no one else understood. Victor had fired a librarian without realizing the librarian also built the Dewey Decimal System. By Thursday morning, the chaos was undeniable. Payroll batches were stuck. Contractors complained. Even routine reimbursements got flagged. I heard from Sam again. He looked exhausted in the selfie he sent. Dark circles under his eyes, half-empty energy drink in the frame. His text read, "Every engineer says the same thing. The payment gateway isn't broken. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do. And it's waiting for one thing, your credential string. My override ID, hard-coded into the vendor's system. Can't they just replace it?" I asked. His reply came instantly. Not without vendor escalation. And guess who the vendor requires for escalation? You. I closed my eyes and exhaled. Somewhere across town, Victor was probably storming around his glass office, blaming interns and juniors for not fixing a simple system glitch. That's what men like him did. When reality didn't bend, they blamed the people holding it up. But it wasn't a glitch. It was protocol. I thought about the irony as I watered my succulent, the same one I carried out of the office. They had mocked my devotion to checklists, to binders, to careful signatures. But those checklists had kept the company alive, quietly, invisibly, for 14 years. And now, without me, the wires were exposed. Friday came like a storm. Vendors escalated directly to legal. One even froze active services. Another sent a formal notice citing non-responsiveness to escalation requests. Sam messaged me again. It's official. The vendor flagged Bayrock as non-compliant. For a company like Bayrock, that wasn't a small bruise. It was a gunshot wound. It meant frozen accounts, halted services, contracts under review. And yet, I didn't celebrate. Not yet. Revenge wasn't the point. Not for me. What I wanted was simple. Recognition of value. Not just for myself, but for every quiet worker who ever got dismissed as useless while propping up the entire system. Because here's the truth. Companies forget. They forget the Christmas weekends you spend rewriting protocols to prevent a compliance breach. They forget the late nights, the vendor calls, the clauses caught just before disaster. They remember only the loudest voices, the flashiest presentations, until the lights go out. That Friday night, I sat in the glow of my lamp, sipping coffee that had gone cold hours earlier. In my inbox sat a fresh vendor notice. Immediate access restriction. Account suspended. Attached was a PDF with my name embedded in the clause language like a tattoo. Escalation Officer, Amanda Torres. I didn't smile. Not yet. I just saved it in a new folder on my desktop and named it something simple. Leverage log, entry 001. Because this wasn't just a story of incompetence. It was a story about power. Quiet, invisible power. And how quickly arrogance crumbles when it collides with structure. Victor thought he'd won. He thought speed mattered more than stability. But by the end of the week, his victory was already unraveling. The fuse had been lit. The only question now was how big the explosion would be. By Monday morning, the silence in Bayrock's finance wing was louder than any alarm. No reimbursements had cleared. Contractor invoices stacked up like unpaid parking tickets. Payroll was due in 3 days, and the system still flashed the same red warning. Escalation Officer, override required. Victor strutted into the board prep call 5 minutes late, sweating slightly but forcing a grin. He clicked through his slides, still the same ones he'd been using, with efficiency gains plastered across the top. It's a minor disruption, he said, waving his hand. Temporary vendor-side glitch. We've got it under control, but he didn't, and people knew it. One of the VPs asked quietly, "Is that why no one's been reimbursed since last Tuesday?" Victor chuckled nervously. "We're implementing an access patch through IT. Should be resolved within 48 hours. Except IT had already stopped replying to his emails. Sam told me in confidence that the engineers had run every test, checked every line of code. The system wasn't broken. It was locked, by design. And the only key was me. Meanwhile, at home, I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of printed vendor notices. Each one highlighted the same root cause: termination of sole authorized escalation officer. My name appeared again and again, a quiet reminder that 14 years of invisible work couldn't just be erased with a smirk. I didn't rush. I didn't call them. I simply documented everything. Each alert, each notice, neatly logged and dated. Entry 002, entry 003, entry 004. Back at Bayrock, panic began to leak through the cracks. By Tuesday, the vendor calls had turned from polite inquiries to direct threats. One cybersecurity vendor suspended active monitoring. Another froze access to a regional payment pipeline. And then came the biggest blow. Infernet Global, the infrastructure vendor that processed 70% of Bayrock's payments, flagged the account as non-compliant. That word again. Non-compliant. Legal carried the printed notice into Victor's office. "Have you reviewed Clause 6.1 of the Service Authorization Addendum?" they asked. Victor didn't look up from his laptop. Clauses are legal fluff. Nobody enforces them, which, for the record, is something only con men and soon-to-be defendants ever say. On Wednesday, the whispers turned into full-blown murmurs. Department heads stopped sugarcoating the situation. Marketing couldn't pay contractors. Sales couldn't reimburse travel. HR had payroll batches bouncing back. Slack threads lit up with questions. "Did we fire the person who ran compliance?" One employee wrote in #general. No one answered. Meanwhile, my phone buzzed. A LinkedIn message. "Hi, Amanda. Sorry to bother. This is Tyler from Infernet Global. We're seeing an escalation issue on our end, and your name's still listed in the protocol binder. Are you still with Bayrock?" I stared at the screen for a long moment. I didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, I opened my private archive and checked the vendor dashboard. Sure enough, my credential string was still hard-coded into the system. PMBT14RSR, active, required, irreplaceable. By Thursday, Victor's mask began to slip. He stormed into the finance bullpen, barking orders. "Bypass the system. Push payments manually. We're not waiting on some outdated protocol." But the system didn't care about his orders. Every attempted override bounced back. Engineers explained, again, that the credential string was embedded at the vendor level. Not editable, not replaceable. The only way forward was escalation, and the only escalation officer listed was me. By Friday morning, even the board couldn't ignore it anymore. Legal counsel briefed them bluntly. Without Amanda Torres's override credentials, Infernet Global has suspended access. You cannot process payments, reimbursements, or vendor invoices. You're in breach of contract. The CEO, gray-haired and 3 weeks from retirement, rubbed his temples. Define breach. Meaning, legal said flatly, we are exposed to audits, penalties, and potential lawsuits. Unless the escalation officer reinstates access, the company cannot function. And still, Victor insisted, it's a systems error. We'll patch it. But no one believed him anymore. I, meanwhile, was calm. I'd spent my career holding the company together in silence. Now, my silence spoke louder than any protest. I wasn't plotting revenge. I wasn't planning a comeback. What I was doing was preparing, building my leverage log, documenting everything. Because when the call finally came, and it would, Bayrock would learn a lesson that far too many companies forget. You don't fire the firewall and expect the system to stay secure. That weekend, I sat in my living room, a stack of vendor notices beside me, my cat curled on the couch. I highlighted another clause with my name in bold. Saved another PDF into the leverage folder. Victor had thought I was nothing but a checklist. But the truth was simpler, sharper. I wasn't the checklist. I was the system. And soon the board was going to find out exactly what that meant. Monday arrived like a report deadline you can't postpone. I woke early, opened my laptop, and stared at the growing spine of my leverage log. Each entry calm, factual, time-stamped. Vendors had escalated. Legal had printed. Finance had stalled. All roads led to the same line of text buried in a contract and branded with my name. At 8:42 a.m., Sam texted, "Emergency board call at 9. Infernet's CEO joining." Then a second message. "Victor says he's got it handled." I actually laughed, not out of cruelty, out of recognition. I've learned that arrogance always sounds the same right before it meets a wall. I wasn't invited to the call, obviously. But documents have a way of finding me. Legal, in their efficiency, had BCC'd the same compliance archive I built years ago and never fully shut off. So, while the board gathered behind their glass walls, I sat at my kitchen table, spooning cold yogurt and watching the edges of my work drift back into my inbox like tidewater. At 9:01, the meeting started. First, the perfunctory greetings. Then Victor, 5 minutes late, clearing his throat over a shaky connection. I pictured him tugging at his tie and smiling like a hostage who'd rehearsed the word temporary. "It's a minor disruption," he began. "We're deploying an access patch with IT." The general counsel didn't bother to hide the sigh. "There is no patch," she said. "The vendor has suspended access due to non-compliance with the Service Authorization Addendum, Clause 6.1. Victor cut in. "Clauses are procedural." We're operational silence, the kind with sharp edges. A chime. New participant joined. Elias Grant, CEO, Infernet Global. His voice carried that careful calm you hear from pilots during turbulence. "Thank you for making time," he said. "Let's keep this efficient." The CEO of Bayrock tried to get ahead of it. "Elias, we've had some internal transitions. We're ready to update our authorization chain and would appreciate a temporary lift while—" Elias raised a finger. I didn't see it, but I knew the gesture. It's universal among people who don't need volume to command a room. "Before we discuss timelines," he said, "I need to clarify a detail." Paper rustled. "Your gateway overrides require the signature of the designated escalation officer listed in your SAA." A beat. Here it reads, "Amanda Torres." There it was. My name, spoken in a room I hadn't been allowed to enter for months before I left. Victor coughed. "She's no longer with the company." Elias paused. When he spoke, his voice warmed by a degree. Right. That explains the failures we saw starting Tuesday. Another rustle, then a sound I'll never forget. Gentle, surprised, edged with genuine disbelief. He laughed. Wait, he said, not unkindly. You fired your what? I could almost hear the boardroom exhale, the split second where everyone checked if anyone else would confess to having missed the obvious. No one did. Elias continued, professional again. Ms. Torres's credential string is embedded in the onboarding protocol. You approved the revision last year, more paper. Any reassignment requires her authorization or a full re-execution cycle. 90 days. Cross-departmental sign-off. Technical revalidation. You cannot pay vendors, reimburse employees, or complete renewals without that chain. The Bayrock CEO tried to retake the wheel. Is there any interim option? There is a path forward, Elias said. Ms. Torres has already provided us documentation of her credential lineage and prior approvals. She contacted our legal office on Friday. We're reviewing a continuity proposal. My phone buzzed. A new email. Infernet Legal. Receipt confirmed. I'd seen it 2 days ago. Seeing it again, mid-call, felt like a second confirmation. Of facts, of value, of the quiet weight of work. Victor attempted one last bluff. We're prepared to submit updated signatories. No, Elias said softly. You submitted backdated forms this morning. Our counsel declined. We don't process fraud. Sam texted me a single word. Yikes. Elias shifted tone, not cruel, just precise. When someone builds the system, don't be surprised when they know how to protect it. Ms. Torres built yours. She kept you off 2 federal audit lists in the last 5 years. You probably didn't know I felt that one. Not because of the praise, because it was true, and because the room that should have known had never cared to ask. Legal slid something across the table. I could hear the faint scrape in the recording that later reached my archive. The general counsel read, Every service addendum since 2019 lists Amanda Torres as the sole escalation officer. Her signature appears on all overrides. We did not notify the vendor of her termination. We did not reassign credentials. Then fix it, the CEO said, but it sounded like habit, not instruction. Victor spoke again, voice smaller now. She was process, not strategy. Elias didn't raise his volume. He didn't need to. If process fails, strategy is bankruptcy. No one argued. The call ended with action items that weren't really actions. Coordinate with vendor. Assess exposure. Prepare external messaging. They're the phrases companies say when they've already lost the first battle and are pretending it's still halftime. I closed my laptop. My apartment was quiet. The steady hum of the fridge, the soft thud of my cat landing on a chair. I made tea. The kettle clicked off. If you're watching this and you've ever been told your work is just a checklist, hear me. Checklists are promises. Every box is a barrier against chaos. Systems don't fail suddenly. They fail exactly where someone decided a promise didn't matter. At noon, a new email arrived from Infernet's executive office. Subject: Consulting engagement, continuity and oversight. The proposed role: Independent vendor liaison, authority to restore access at my discretion. Terms fair, rate generous, scope mine to define. I didn't gloat. I didn't screenshot it for friends. I added it to the leverage log and wrote a single line beneath. Value is only invisible to people who don't do the work. Back at Bayrock, they drafted a second emergency call for the afternoon. I wasn't on it either. I didn't need to be. The room would look the same. Tired faces, quiet legal, Victor avoiding eye contact with the future. By evening, Tyler from the vendor texted, If you're up for it, we'd like you on a call tomorrow to outline restoration steps. Your timeline, I stared at the message, then typed back, I'll send terms in the morning. Because this isn't about revenge, it never was. This is about naming the work and then pricing it. And if they want the lights back on, they'll read the checklist. Out loud. Tuesday morning, I woke before my alarm. The apartment was quiet in that way cities sometimes are after a storm. Traffic there, but dulled. The air lighter. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and read the subject line waiting at the top of my inbox. Consulting engagement. Continuity and oversight. Final terms. I read slowly, not because I needed to, but because I could. Scope. Restore access, revalidate credential chains, audit controls, train successors. Authority, mine. Rate, generous. Duration, flexible, with an annual retainer. I added it to the leverage log, then drafted a short reply to Infranet's legal team. Accepted. Beginning today, I attached my NDA and a single-page implementation plan with my initials in the corner. A habit, a promise to myself. At 9:30 a.m., Tyler looped me into a vendor-side kickoff. No drama, just names, roles, and a clear goal. Get Bayrock operational without compromising the protocols that kept them safe. I listened more than I spoke. When it was my turn, I outlined next steps. Verify the credential lineage, rebuild escalation routing, temporarily proxy my token while reassignments are vetted, and set up a dual control process so no one person could ever pull what Victor tried again. Tyler exhaled audibly. "I've missed this voice," he said. Then, more formally, "We'll follow your runbook." At 11:02 a.m., Bayrock's CEO emailed me directly. No subject fluff, no exclamation points. Cool, professional, and tired. "Amanda, we request your assistance. We will accept your terms." I stared at the sentence longer than I expected. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was relief, like watching a building stop swaying after the earthquake subsides. I replied with a list. Not revenge. Requirements. 1. Acknowledgement in writing, filed with the board minutes, that the escalation chain was built correctly and failed because leadership ignored it. 2. A stipend for the contractors and employees who'd waited on reimbursements, paid immediately upon restoration. 3. Protection for the juniors who'd been scapegoated. Jenna in AP, Milo in IT. No retaliatory reviews, no performance improvement plans. 4. Mandatory training for executives on vendor risk, taught by me, recorded, and added to onboarding for future leaders. 5. A commitment to a culture change in writing. Checklists are not optional. They are policy. I read it again. None of it was flashy. All of it was structural. The CEO called at 11:19 a.m. His voice was rough at the edges. "We'll sign." All of it. There was a pause. I heard him inhale, then say quietly, "I'm sorry, Amanda." I believed him enough to continue. By early afternoon, I had a temporary proxy in place with Infranet. We validated the chain, tested a dummy payment in the sandbox, then a small live reimbursement. $100 to a sales rep who'd been floating hotel charges on a personal card. It cleared in seconds. In the Slack export I received later, someone posted a single confetti emoji in general. Then another person typed, "We're back." I didn't smile yet. It wasn't fixed. It was moving. At 2:40 p.m., I joined a joint call. Me on vendor side, Bayrock on theirs. Legal, finance, operations, no Victor. HR had sent the email that morning. Effective immediately, Mr. Hale has resigned. Resigned is a corporate verb with flexible geometry. I let it pass. The meeting was clinical, which is how restoration should feel. I walked them through the map they'd chosen not to read. Where escalation sits, why dual control exists, how overrides leave audit trails. I watched shoulders loosen as process replaced panic. When we got to the last slide, ownership, I didn't overplay it. I just said, what went wrong wasn't a system error. It was a choice, no one argued. We staged the releases, reimbursements first, then vendor invoices by tier, then renewals with continuity clauses. Each step verified, logged, checked twice. By 5:12 p.m., the largest stuck payment, a renewal for the cybersecurity partner, pushed through. They restored monitoring within the hour. The dashboard slid from red to amber, then settled on a steady green. It wasn't dramatic. It was a dimmer switch turning the room back on. I closed my laptop and let the quiet come back. My cat thumped onto the chair opposite me and settled like a paperweight. Outside, the late sun found the spine of my succulent and lit up a thin seam along one leaf I'd thought was gone. It wasn't. It was just healing. That night, the board sent me a countersigned letter fulfilling the 5 conditions. The stipend hit accounts. Jenna wrote me a thank you that I didn't deserve but saved anyway. Milo changed his LinkedIn headline back to something that sounded like hope. Sam texted, "Drinks on me when you want them." I told him I'd bring a checklist for the bar. Sometime after 9, I opened the file where I keep phrases I've heard about my work. Useless. Old-fashioned. Just process. Underneath, I typed a new line. Process is how people keep their promises to each other. I didn't go back to Bayrock. I didn't need to. My consulting agreement sat with the vendor now. My calendar filled with audits, trainings, and the kind of work that keeps things boring in the best possible way. When the world is quiet, the systems are working. If you're watching this, and you've been told your value is small because your work isn't loud, hear me. You are not background. You are the wiring. And when someone laughs at the checklist, remember, they're laughing at the thing that keeps the lights on. Wednesday morning, the CEO sent one final note. We've posted a policy change. Checklists are now mandatory for all executive decisions involving vendors. Required sign-off. Compliance, legal, and operations. There was a PDF attached with my framework. The one I'd built in evenings and weekends, in the long, quiet hours after someone else's meeting ran over my calendar. I made coffee. I watched steam rise. I let myself smile, small and private. This isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about recognition, about the quiet architecture of trust, about the cost of pretending the boring parts don't matter. I signed the last page of my vendor runbook and closed the binder. The spine cracked the way a well-used book does, not breaking, just settling. Clear your desk, he'd said. I did. And then I drew the map they'll use long after anyone remembers our names.